Tonight, we are starting with breaking news of a possible ceasefire in the war between Iran, Israel, and in a lot of ways, the United States. In about 48 hours, we have gone from seeing the U.S. bomb Iran's nuclear facilities to Israel and Iran bombing each other, and then Iran launching missiles at a U.S. base in the Middle East, to now the president of the United States declaring that a ceasefire agreement has been reached. All of this culminating in this very bizarre new form of social media / real world diplomacy that I don't think we've ever seen before. And here's the post. Congratulations to everyone. I'm going to read the whole thing because this is a moment here in history. It has been fully agreed by and between Israel and Iran that there will be a complete and total ceasefire in approximately 6 hours from now, when Israel and Iran have wound down and completed their in-progress final missions for 12 hours, at which point war will be considered ended. Officially, Iran will start the ceasefire upon the 12th hour. Israel will start the ceasefire, and upon the 24th hour, an official end to the 12-day war will be saluted by the world. During each ceasefire, the other side will remain peaceful and respectful on the assumption that everything works as it should, which it will. I would like to congratulate both countries, Israel and Iran, on having the stamina, the courage, and intelligence to end what should be called the 12-day war. This is a war that could have gone on for years, destroyed the entire Middle East, but it didn't and never will. God bless Israel. God bless Iran. God bless the Middle East. God bless the United States. And God bless the world. This is a far cry from moments like these, where the world was holding its collective breath. A lot of people wondering if we were possibly witnessing the beginning of World War III. These are Iranian missiles over Qatar, heading for an American military base there. But here's the thing. Apparently, Iran gave a heads up that those missiles were coming. They were all but one shot down. Then came the post before that ceasefire, the one that we just told you about. Again, this is another one that's going to be studied in political science classes going forward. President Trump saying, "Thank you, Iran." Quote, "I want to thank Iran for giving us early notice, which made it possible for no lives to be lost and nobody to be injured." Is he trolling there? We just don't know, but all of it out on display for the world to see. He went on to suggest that all of this could now be over, saying, quote, "Perhaps Iran can now proceed to peace and harmony in the region, and I will enthusiastically encourage Israel to do the same." That is key here. We're going to be talking about that in just a little bit. Finally, is this it? Are we now going to see peace in the Middle East? Is Iran no longer a nuclear threat after the before and after pictures that we've seen of those nuclear sites? It's hard to tell exactly what's been destroyed, but here's some of the stuff that we can see from satellite images from above. But there are still so many questions about what was destroyed underground, and specifically questions about this 400 kilograms of missing enriched uranium that we're going to be tackling a little bit later as well. Our team is all over this breaking news. We've got NBC News international correspondent Matt Bradley out in Tel Aviv tonight. NBC senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez over at the White House. NBC's Melanie Zanona is over at Capitol Hill, and we've got a brilliant panel. Elise Labott and Bradley Bowman also here to break all this down. Matt, starting with you, we're seeing this post here, but are there missiles still flying? Is there still active fighting this late into the night there?
Yeah, well, we heard from a media source that's connected to the Iranian security apparatus. They said that only a couple of minutes before Donald Trump announced this ceasefire that was set to start 6 hours from then, there were still attacks on Iran by the Israelis. And we also heard from the Israeli Farsi-speaking Twitter group saying that there was a sprawling new announcement of evacuations in Tehran. So it looks as though the Israelis are going to continue to pummel Iran. We've heard no confirmation about this ceasefire deal from the Israelis. We've heard basically nothing from the Iranians either, though Reuters had a report confirming that this is happening. But it looks as though the fighting is going to go right up until the wire.
And Matt, I'm trying to read this through here. Like, what are the potential sticking points? Because as I read this, it seems to say, like, Iran is basically agreeing to get potentially pummeled for like 12 hours without firing back. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what it sounded like to me. I was wondering the same thing. Do the Israelis get a free hand over Iran for 12 hours? Well, maybe they do. The fact is that the Iranians or the Israelis have already said that they have complete air dominance over western Iran and the capital of Tehran, and have for the past couple of days. So that might not change anything in terms of what's going on the ground, but it does seem very lopsided if we're just to read what President Trump posted on Truth Social, that the Iranians would have to stop firing and that the Israelis would only have to stop firing 12 hours later. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, it looks like both sides will stop firing for 12 hours before the war is announced as completely finished. No details about a quid pro quo, nothing for the Israelis about, nuclear checks or uranium checks, where all of this uranium has gone, nothing about nothing for the Iranians for security guarantees or anything guaranteeing the viability of their regime going forward, which has been badly weakened. So there's a lot of details that are missing, but this is the president of the United States, and he's saying it with immense certainty, really. And, while we don't necessarily have to believe everything that President Trump says, this one, he does seem to be going pretty far out on a limb.
Yeah, immense certainty for sure, with a lot of caps locks here. Meanwhile, you're just talking about that uranium, the enriched uranium that we've been hearing so much of. If I understand it correctly, it's like 400 kilos, like 880 some pounds of enriched uranium, up to about 60%. Do we know where that's at right now? Is that still kind of like a bargaining chip in all of that, or in all of this, or any word on where it might have gone in the last 3 days?
Yeah, got it. Your guess is as good as mine. We don't know where it is. We don't know if it was still underneath the Fordo nuclear enrichment facility, which was bombed presumably to smithereens by multiple bunker-busting bombs dropped by the U.S. just 2 nights ago. We don't know whether this was moved out, whether it's somewhere else in the country, whether it's been split up. All of these are all questions that would factor into this deal that President Trump just announced. You would think that the Israelis would want to have some sort of security, some sort of guarantee about the nature of where that uranium is, its level of enrichment, and its proximity to being turned into a bomb. But we don't have those details now.
And I mean, there's no precedent for what we're seeing today, and yet you have covered Israeli ceasefires before. Does it look like we're going to see an intensification of fighting up until the end? Like, what does the IDF usually do in a ceasefire scenario?
Yeah, I mean, in Gaza and in Lebanon, we've seen the IDF kind of trying to stake out the best possible position before the guns go silent. They want to get a chair right after the music stops. They don't want to be caught out. And this is probably going to be the same. But again, given the text that we're reading, the letter of the law as stated by President Trump, it does look like the Israelis are getting quite a big buffer zone of time in which they can do their worst on Iran, as if they already hadn't. They can continue to pummel Iran for those 12 hours, and they very well likely will,
And I mean, this is going to be an obvious question on a lot of people's minds. Does that include possibly continuing to try to take out the supreme Ayatollah there?
The supreme leader is definitely in the crosshairs, but it sounds as though if the Iranians or the Israelis or the Americans wanted to do that, they might have already done it. To do so might be considered a bridge too far, though it seems as though all of the bridges that were too far have already been crossed by both Israel and the United States. They're setting precedents one on top of another. So assassinating the Ayatollah wouldn't necessarily seem like such a massive escalation considering what's already happened, but it would make things more complicated in terms of rebuilding the country and in terms of trying to create a day after, which the Israelis have tended to neglect in every theater of war over the past year and a half. When we look at Lebanon, Hamas in the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and now their attacks in Syria, they haven't left open much room for a political solution that would tie everything up nicely in a bow, and it doesn't look like they're going to do the same with Iran.
Mm-hmm. And you're out in Tel Aviv. It is right now the dead of night. Even though there is a heightened state of alert, people are sleeping in Israel, right? And they are going to wake up tomorrow to a very different looking landscape in the world. What do you think the reaction is going to be?
think one of massive relief. I think everybody who went to bed tonight here in Israel was expecting to be woken up within several hours with sirens and the need to rush to one of these safe rooms that almost every building here has. This has been the ritual every night for the past 10 days, and I'm sure that most Israelis believed that they were going to be facing this again tonight. When they wake up this morning, if they went to bed before President Trump's announcement, it's going to be like Christmas morning, knowing that they're not going to be facing any more Iranian bombardments, at least for now.
And Matt, you know, there's a lot of symbolism here in the 12th day war, the 12 hours. But here in the 11th day or whatever day we're in, like, how much longer could Israeli defenses kept up? Like, how long could they have kept up this interception rate? And how many more ballistic missiles did Iran have to engage in Israel in this way?
We don't know the answer to that. Of course, the Israelis are keeping the number of ballistic missiles or missile defense systems they have pretty tight to their chests. As far as the Iranians are concerned, they say that they've knocked out 2/3 of Iran's ballistic missile launchers, which is why we're seeing a dwindling number of projectiles in every salvo that the Iranians fire at Israel. To be sure, though, quite a few of them, at least an increasing number of them, when you talk about the ratio, seem to be getting through and striking basically civilian areas here in Tel Aviv and elsewhere in the country. So we don't know the details of Israel's capacity to continue to deflect Iranian weapons, but this is definitely going to come as a relief.
Yeah, you know, we'll hope that ceasefire holds. Matt Bradley, thank you so much. And let's get over to NBC's Gabe Gutierrez over in Washington. Gabe, at the White House, like, not only does it look like the president's been working the phones with world leaders here, as I understand it, he's also been working the phones with reporters, including some reporters at NBC. What's going on?
Yeah, that's right. Look, Gotti, I have several things I want to catch you up on. One, I just spoke with a senior White House official that filled in some of the blanks on the timeline here throughout the afternoon. I'll get to that in a moment. First, I want to get to the president's comments, though, to my colleague, Amisha Sindor. She did manage to get him on the phone a short time ago. He says that this is a wonderful day for the world. He also says, I think the ceasefire is unlimited. It's going to go on forever. And he also, when asked if the war was completely over, he says, yes, I don't believe they will ever be shooting at each other again. Again, those are the comments from the President of the United States a short time ago to my colleague, Amish Alcindor. Now, just a few minutes ago, I did speak with a senior White House official who filled in some of those blanks about how this all went down throughout the afternoon. Now, the White House, this White House official says that Iran did alert the U.S. about this strike through Qatar. Now, Qatar was a very important mediator here. After that, the president, through intermediaries, spoke with Iran. And there was a post earlier on this evening when the president first called it a weak response by Iran. You read it in your introduction. He also said he called it a weak response, but he also thanked Iran for letting the U.S. know about the strike ahead of time. That's what he was referring to. It was after that social media post that, according to the senior White House official, that President Trump then called Prime Minister Netanyahu. And he spoke with Bibi Netanyahu this evening from the Oval Office. A lot of this was unfolding while the president was in the Oval Office, not in the Situation Room. He had other national security staff monitoring these developments from the Situation Room. The president spoke with Prime Minister Netanyahu and basically said that he wanted this war to end. And it was after that conversation with Benjamin Netanyahu that the surprise announcement came just after 6 o'clock Eastern time that both Israel and Iran had agreed to a ceasefire. Now, one thing I found particularly interesting, according to the senior White House official, that's those stages of the ceasefire that you were discussing with Matt. First, the 12 hours that Iran would stop firing, then followed by Israel firing. That apparently was an idea that that President Trump came up with, according to the senior White House official, to appease Israel. So this is a situation where Israel was not likely to agree to any sort of ceasefire, wanted some guarantee that Iran would actually stop. and that's why this was a staged ceasefire, according to the senior White House official. So this official saying that the president is elated at this point. The administration is touting this as a major foreign policy victory, but we're just starting to get word of exactly how this all unfolded on a remarkable day here at the White House, Guy.
Yeah, quite the negotiation tactic there. And we're so used to seeing diplomacy happen behind closed doors and then hearing a very watered-down version of an official readout with a bunch of people participating in the decision-making. But so much of what we are watching here play out seems to be coming from the president's social media posts. Is there a lot of participation in the decision-making here, or is a lot of this happening like at the president's whim?
Well, the president, more so than others, more so than any other president, does use social media to his advantage and presents agreements that may have been agreed to behind closed doors almost in real time for the public to be able to consume. However, in this case, we do understand that while the president was very involved, he also used intermediaries. We understand Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who also happens to be the interim national security advisor, he was involved in some of these negotiations with Iranian officials, again, through Qatari officials, and also Vice President J.D. Vance was involved in all this, as well as a special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff. Though this was happening very quickly, Gotti, but I think what you're referring to is you've never seen a president like this before use social media and then make this announcement. Usually in other previous administrations, you'd see a very formal statement with diplomatic language in that statement. We did not see this evening in multiple social media posts from President Trump.
Yeah, and we've also seen some reporting out about the calculus behind this, or maybe the lack of calculus. All of this has some risks. We know that there was a possibility of sleeper cells threatening the United States. Some of that is state-directed, and then some of that is ideologically driven. But what was the White House's calculus when it came to threats like, a potential dirty bomb threat or something like a sleeper cell being activated in the United States?
Well, look, according to NBC News reporting, citing 2 U.S. officials as well as another person familiar with the matter, President Trump did get a warning from the Iranian government through an intermediary last week while he was at that G7 summit in Canada. By the way, Gotti, I remember speaking with you, it was about a week ago, yes, a week ago, when he abruptly left that G7 summit. That day, he had apparently gotten this warning that Iran was warning that if the U.S. did strike Iran, that Iran could come back and activate these sleeper cells and perhaps unleash some sort of terrorist attack. After that, just yesterday, we had the Department of Homeland Security issue this new bulletin warning of either low-level cyber attacks or potentially, if Iranian officials were to sign off on it, that there could be some attack against Americans here in the homeland. The senior administration official that I spoke with this evening seemed to downplay the concern just a bit of sleeper cells here in the U.S. And I think that's because the way the White House is seeing this is that Iran right now is not motivated to carry out some sort of attack because they're in a bad position right now. Their weapons, their defenses have been so degraded by the Israeli military that they really have their backs up against the wall here. So it would not be in Iran's interest to escalate this by having one of their proxies or a potential sleeper cell in the United States carry out some sort of an attack on Americans here at home. That would require a huge response from the White House, and that's something that the administration feels that Iran just isn't going to try at this point. Significantly, though, up until just a few hours ago, the idea of a ceasefire seemed very far off. But I think you were right to raise the point with Matt that so far we do not have confirmation from the Israelis. It could be that the Israelis are perhaps waiting to see how the first 12 hours of this ceasefire play out, whether Iran does indeed stop firing, and then they may be inclined to go along with this. But, of course, President Trump, full of optimism, saying that essentially this war is over and declaring that it is over. Certainly, we'll just have to see how things play out over the next 24 hours, Scotty.
Yeah, you put it out on social media and you see what happens next. That is the world that we live in today. Gabe Gutierrez at the White House. Gabe, thank you so much. Joining us now is Elise Labott. She is the Edward R. Murrow Press Fellow at the Council of Foreign Relations, and Bradley Bowman. He is the Senior Director of the Foundation of Defense of Democracy Center for Military and Political Power. Thank you both for being with us here. It has been a weekend of very high anxiety. Elise, starting with you, do you think that this ceasefire is going to stand?
I think it might stand for, the next 24 to 48 hours, maybe even for a couple of days or weeks, Scotty. But sources that I've spoken to in the region say clearly it's good news for now, but they don't think it will hold. And why won't it hold? Because the actual objectives of both sides are really not, have really not been met. The Iranian program, as we've been talking about over the last few days, was not completely, as President Trump said, obliterated. It was damaged. But Iran still, we've talked a little bit about some of that nuclear fissile material that could go for a nuclear weapon, that enriched uranium. We don't know where it is. It's unaccounted for. It's pretty likely, because we haven't had any radiation damage reported, that it's being, hid. And some satellite imagery from experts, nuclear experts, show that it has been moved around even before the U.S. strikes, and even, as they knew the Israelis were going to hit. So that's on one side. On the Israeli side, the Israelis have a different agenda than the United States. It's pretty clear that President Trump wants to get this in his rearview mirror. He wants to move on from this war. The Israelis have talked about regime change. President Trump, even though he's kind of flirted at it, is not interested in that. And so President Trump wants to, end this war, call it a day. I think Israel has been beat up. It's still taking, obviously it did a lot of damage to Iran's nuclear facilities, but it took a lot of missiles. There were casualties, and its interceptors are dwindling down as faster than they can produce them. So I think in what I've talked to sources in the region, they say, look, it's possible that everybody kind of wants to, the Israelis and the Iranians want to stop the fighting, regroup, live to fight another day. The Iranians still haven't said that they're ready to abandon their nuclear program entirely. So that either means more strikes by the U.S. and or Israel, or it means regime change. But the Iranian program is going to live another day.
Yeah, Elise, thanks. And Brad, I'm still trying to figure out exactly how and what a ceasefire looks like in this particular case. What does officially Iran will start the ceasefire, and upon the 12th hour, Israel will start the ceasefire, and upon the 24th hour, there will officially be an end to the war. What does that look like on a practical end here?
I think if you're confused by the social media post, you're not alone. I mean, in this single post, Trump announced the ceasefire. A confusing timeline, as your question implies. Name the war and extended blessings and thanks to all. So not too shabby for a single social media post. But all joking aside, we have a ceasefire announced, but the shooting continues. And I'm not going to say the deal is done until we actually have a ceasefire. Right. And as Elise suggested, not all ceasefires are good. Some are bad. And how do you judge between a good and a bad ceasefire? I'd say whether it addresses the sources of the conflict. And from an Israeli perspective, and I would say from the correct perspective, the source of the conflict here is a regime that is dedicated to the destruction of Israel, that is the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, and has the largest ballistic missile program in the Middle East. And so until that, and has been pursuing inch by inch, moving closer and closer toward a nuclear weapons capability. Until those fundamental dynamics change, I think it's a little premature to announce a forever ceasefire, because forever is a long time, and Israel's not willing to accept a status quo where you have a regime dedicated to its destruction and pursuing the world's most dangerous weapon.
And Elise, was this attack by Iran, the one on a U.S. base, was that an off-ramp, as we're kind of being led to believe here? Is Iran on its last leg? Put it into context for us here.
I don't think Iran is on its last leg. I think what it wanted to do was show strength, show that it was going to respond. It couldn't just, not do anything, but it certainly didn't want to escalate it further. It didn't want to really get into a protracted war with the United States. The war with Israel and those initial strikes were enough. So I think it wanted to show some strength, but also signal that it's ready to, end the fighting. We're not talking about negotiation. And President Trump, from what they've been saying, ending all your nuclear ambitions and, getting rid of all your fissile material and no enrichment is not a negotiation. That's a surrender. Earlier today, the Supreme Leader said anybody that knows Iran knows that we never surrender. So, I mean, I think this kind of puts everything in abeyance. I think, to your point on the ceasefire, Israel wasn't going to, stop fighting until it saw that Iran was going to stop fighting. And, President Trump, if he did, in fact, come up with the idea, it's possible the Israelis did. But, if he did, look, this is a victory for President Trump. It could be a temporary victory. I think ultimately the, root causes, as we were saying, of the conflict are still there. And so I think this certainly everybody's going to sigh a breath of relief tonight if the next 24-hour holds. But it's going to be a precarious days, weeks, and possibly months.
Yeah, the root causes are still there. The nuclear concern was one of them, but also externally for those Persians or Iranians here in the United States and for a lot of people that live in Iran, there was that wishful thinking of a potential revolution that would overthrow this regime. Do you think that is still very much wishful thinking? Is that a possibility, especially in the 12-hour window where we don't know what the details are, but the IDF can continue to fire upon with complete air superiority over Iran and potentially take out more leadership?
I don't.
Yeah,
I could be
Bradley.
wrong.
Oh,
sorry. Go ahead, Bradley.
No. At least go ahead and then we'll go to Bradley. Okay, perfect. Bradley, go ahead.
Great question and a great analysis by Elise. I'll add my 2 cents quickly. If there is in fact a ceasefire, I'm going to be watching the negotiations that follow. And from my perspective, the Iranian regime has been using negotiations for years to basically create a patient pathway to a nuclear weapons capability. And so I think the Trump administration is going to demand a full and permanent dismantlement of Iran's nuclear weapons program and its strategic missile capabilities. And I don't see a world where this regime is going to agree to that. And so I think along with demanding such an agreement like that, it's wise for the United States to be doing a max support for the Iranian people. I'm not arguing for a U.S. military regime change. I am not. I am saying let's support the Iranian people in their effort, should they choose to do so, to finally have a government that is interested in their well-being rather than being the leading exporter of terrorism.
And Elise, final word to you. Do you think that, we could see a potential homegrown revolution after the dust settles from all this?
I think it's ultimately that's, really what it's going to be. But, President Trump kind of flirted with the idea yesterday saying, oh, if they're not going to make Iran great and they're not going to abandon their nuclear weapons, then why shouldn't there be? President Trump is not going to take out the Iranian leader. And it's let's note that he's decreased democracy funding for Iran, both in his last administration and this administration. The Israelis said to the Iranian people, Prime Minister Netanyahu said, this is your chance. We prepped the ground for you. Let's rise up. I think there's going to be talks between the Israelis and the Iranian opposition. However, the Iranian opposition is not, organized. And so I think there's a lot of talks going on in Iran right now. I think organizations like Bradley's that do a lot of good work in Iran with Iranian opposition and talking to the diaspora around the world. I think there are a lot of conversations going on. I don't think the euphoria that maybe there was a couple of days ago is going to last very long. But watch this space, Scotty.
Yeah, Elise Labott and Bradley Bowman, we will, and hopefully we'll be doing with both of you guys. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah.
That NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Melanie Zanona joins us now. Melanie, what's the word on Capitol Hill about all this?
Yeah, there was a big sigh of relief here on Capitol Hill from both sides of the aisles. Democrats, I would say, though, were a little bit more cautious, a little bit more skeptical. They said they only learned of this information online. They want some more facts, some more information before they jump to any conclusions here. But Republicans were very quick to shower praise on Donald Trump, some of them even suggesting that he should win the Nobel Peace Prize because of the U.S. involvement here. And I also caught up with Speaker Mike Johnson moments after the news broke. Here's what he had to say.
It will be called the 12-Day War, I suppose. That's what we're nicknaming it already, and just a remarkable turn of events. So let's hope that this is this historic, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that we would all experience to truly have peace in the Middle East. That's what the people there deserve, and they yearn for, even the Iranian people. And we hope that that all comes about.
Now, the big question on Capitol Hill is whether there's still going to be a bipartisan push to essentially block further involvement in Iran. That is something that a bipartisan group of lawmakers had been pushing. But I asked Johnson about that, and he said it's a moot point now, and he doesn't see a need for it. And one of the Republican co-sponsors of that effort, Thomas Massey, says that he informed the Speaker on the House floor just shortly ago that he does not plan to bring it up as long as the ceasefire deal holds. So perhaps we won't see a vote on that. Democrats still could always force a vote. Still remains to be seen, though.
Interesting. I mean, leading up to this, there was the big controversy and the debate about whether any of this was constitutional or an overreach of powers without the blessing of Congress. And that's been something that we've seen not just with President Trump, but presidents before him. Is that entire debate moot now as well, or is that going to continue to be discussed?
I mean, I think it depends on how it plays out. It depends on if the ceasefire holds. I do think there is still going to be a very fervent debate, at least within the Democratic Party, about this. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she's a progressive Democrat. She made an interesting point saying that Trump acknowledged in that Truth Social post announcing the ceasefire that this was a war. You also heard it in the Johnson remarks to me, him saying, we're calling this the 12-day war. And the reason why that matters, Gotti, is because that strikes at the heart of this constitutional debate, because Congress is the sole authority over whether we can go into war. They have the power to declare war, not the president. But Republicans have argued that in this case, this was a limited strike. This was not a war, at least prior to the strikes. That's what they were saying. And that Trump has the authority to respond to imminent threats. So now that Trump has acknowledged it was a war, it is a war, that obviously could be something that Democrats could use to make the argument that the strikes in the first place were not constitutional. But again, the question is whether there actually will be this debate on the House floor or the Senate floor. We're just not sure yet.
And we saw Republicans like Representative Massey kind of criticizing Trump leading up to this as well. There was, I mean, within the MAGA base, there were people saying, what are we doing? Like, why are we going into another Middle Eastern war? Do you think that this ceasefire, if it holds, will patch everything up with those people that voted for the president, thinking that they wouldn't see any type of U.S. involvement in Middle Eastern affairs? Or do you think that that's going to still stick with people that didn't want any U.S. involvement in any type of further conflict?
I do think that there's going to be a desire within the MAGA coalition and the MAGA base to rally around the president, rally around Trump in this moment, because at this point there were no casualties. Trump got in. It appears that the conflict is resolving, with the ceasefire as long as it holds. I think people are going to be really eager to give Trump credit and to not have these divisions in the Republican Party. But I will say when it comes to Republican Congressman Tom Massey, he has been in the crosshairs for a while now. He's also opposing the big, beautiful bill on Capitol Hill. So I don't think that the anger that Trump and some of his team have at Republican Congressman Tom Massey is going to go away. But I do think some of the other people who've been pretty vocal critics, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, they're probably going to play nice again and play nice in the sandbox after this.
Interesting. And big picture here, Mel, before we let you go. In the past, we've had at least the veneer or the belief that some of the committees, some of the lawmakers were very briefed up on these types of affairs, intelligence committees, what have you. But it seems like we're entering an era in which it's a very small circle around the president, and the president is the one that's making, these decisions at the last minute, at the last second, possibly on a whim. Is there a lot of talk between what the president decides to do and Congress in those critical moments, or is he kind of going at it alone here?
Congress is almost completely out of the loop, even for Republicans. We do know that the congressional leadership did get a courtesy heads up on Saturday before the strikes on Iran. But even the Republican leaderships were not really read in fully on the situation. They were not really being briefed. It is usually customary that the so-called Gang of Eight, which is the top congressional leaders in both parties from both chambers, would get a formal briefing. That has not even still happened yet. Now, the House and Senate will get a briefing tomorrow, but that has really sparked some of the frustration here on Capitol Hill, certainly among Democrats and quietly among Republicans as well, is that they have not been involved in the decision making. They were not briefed. They were not really given formal heads up. And so that is something that has also been a topic of debate here in Capitol Hill.
Yeah, pretty wild times. My eyes, your eyes, their eyes all see the same information pretty much at the same time in real time. Wild times we live in. Melanie Zanona, thanks so much. And as all this happened, major cities in the United States stepped up security over concerns about the potential retaliation from Iran, particularly when it comes to those sleeper cells we were talking about. Here's what Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said about that earlier this day.
We've seen some from overseas and some that have been here, maybe gone overseas for a short period of time, become radicalized and come back, or individuals that are right here in the United States. So we have to watch for all of it and to be diligent on all of it, and we'll continue to do so.
And joining us now is Evan Coleman, a terrorist expert and CEO of Cloudburst Technologies. Thanks so much for being with us. So the ceasefire, would that extend to ideological motivated terror cells that are potentially here in the United States?
Well, it depends by what you mean by ideologically motivated. If you're talking about cells that are following directly on the orders of the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the answer is that it sure looks like Iran wants to, move away from military conflict here. Mm-hmm. They don't look like they want to escalate. They look like they want to de-escalate. So if you're talking about cells that are under the direct control of the IRGC or semi-direct control, it seems unlikely. But there are other folks out there. And it's important to understand that even with Iran, which is not like Al-Qaeda or ISIS, it doesn't have a large group of, sympathizers out there that are just randomly supporting Iran. Mm-hmm. There are people out there right now that are generally anti-government. They're domestic extremists. They may be motivated by what they see going on right now in the Middle East. They may not even be Iranian. But they may take this opportunity to carry out an act of violence. And I think that's the primary threat here, is unaffiliated extremists who are simply motivated by this particular opportunity and decide to take action.
And what are local and federal officials going to be looking out for over the next few days or weeks? Does this all of a sudden mean that the threat level drops, or do we continue to keep our defenses up?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to see if the ceasefire is real, if it holds up, because, Iranian agents have had a history of targeting senior U.S. officials and assassination plots, as well as foreign ambassadors, et cetera. There have been some bomb plots that have targeted, embassies and critical infrastructure. So we're not entirely out of the woods there, right? But I really think that the primary threat they're going to be looking at right now is indications on social media or elsewhere that domestic extremists, who are upset or aggravated by what's going on right now in the Middle East, may choose this as an opportunity, whether or not the Iranian regime is involved or supportive or even interested. They're going to take this opportunity. I think that's the primary threat right now, as long as the ceasefire holds. If things get, desperate for Iran and they really feel their back is against the wall, let's remember, this is a regime that has carried out bombings targeting Israeli interests, Jewish community centers, foreign embassies. If things get intense, we may see an escalation.
What's the thing? Got it. Evan Coleman, thank you so very much for that. And meanwhile, as we wait to see if this ceasefire is going to hold, the Iranian community here in Los Angeles has some very nuanced feelings about what they have seen over the last few days. While some are trying to grapple with their contempt for their government at home, others are still hoping for regime change, as we've been talking about. But they're also worried about friends and family back in Iran. And NBC's Ryan Chandler joins us now. Ryan, so you've been speaking with the Iranian community here in Los Angeles leading up to this. What were they saying?
This has been a very insightful couple of days for me personally to speak with this unique section of the American public for whom this war is not playing out just in headlines or in politics, but it is very deeply personal for them. These are many of first-generation immigrants who came over during the Iranian Revolution and still have dear friends and family in Tehran right now. And what we've heard almost universally is a mix of course, anxiety and sadness for the loved ones that they have in Iran, but also a sense of optimism that this may be the push that a broad section of the Iranian public needs in order to enact the change in government that they've been wanting to see. This is a community, Tehran-Angeles, that is the largest concentration of Iranians outside of Iran, and they fly the Iranian flag alongside the American flag. That image to me was the perfect encapsulation of how they're feeling right now. This is not about picking sides between Iran and the U.S. Many of them actually think that the U.S. can help them to achieve their goals, making a very distinct separation between the Iranian public and the Iranian government, which they universally condemn.
Now, you know, and not to speak for everybody here, but were they concerned about the nuclear threat, or were they looking for a regime change?
Many of them were not shying away from the term regime change. We noticed a lot of apprehension from people when we asked them to speak to us. A lot of them don't want to share this sentiment publicly for fear of retaliation from the Iranian regime, not just against them, but against their family who is still there. But many of them told us privately that they're very thankful to President Trump, to the Americans for stepping in and bringing us to a place where maybe they will be able to replace the government there that they blame for years of sanctions that have held the country back economically, that have made the country somewhat of a pariah on the world stage. A lot of them have memories of an Iran that they say no longer exists, pre-revolution, that was more friendly to the West, more open economically and politically, more progressive and secular. A lot of them still have dreams of returning to a place like that. Here's a little bit of what they told us and the differing opinions that they have when it comes to whether the United States should actually help to effect regime change. Is there a sense that the Iranian people, some of them at least, may welcome American support for regime change then?
Yeah, maybe a little bit push can help them because, you know, they have the government has an army. That's why, you know, 2 years ago, the people tried for the revolution of Massa. They really, especially new generation, they tried hard, but they couldn't make it. And it's many of them killed by the government. So I'm thinking that maybe it can help.
There is a lot of problem. There is a lot of problem, but it's nothing that can be solved from the outside. People in Iran, they have to do it themselves. There's nothing they've tried it. They thought it was going to be over in about 3 days. It doesn't happen.
So, Gadi, of course, anecdotal perspectives, but we did seem to get the impression that this is representative of a much broader portion of public opinion, not just among Iranian Americans, but Iranians in their home country as well. The debate does not seem to be about whether Iran needs change. Across the board, we heard a lot of dissatisfaction with the current state of Iran. The debate is whether the United States has a role in implementing that change.
And that man that you were talking to at the end there, he was basically saying that he wants to see a revolution born in Iran to overthrow the regime, as opposed to having U.S. involvement that leads to an overthrow.
Exactly. Interesting about that man. He said, this is the second time that I've waved this sign. He came over during the Iranian Revolution and fought back against war almost 50 years ago. And decades later, we were talking, he says, it doesn't seem like a whole lot has changed because I'm still advocating against war. He recognized there are problems in Iran, but he said, the United States dropping bombs is not a way to make peace. This needs to be something that comes from the people of Iran.
And now peace is possibly on the horizon. Ryan, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And after today's missile attacks by Iran on a U.S. airbase in Qatar, a lot of eyes are on the global oil market. Oil prices plummeting after today's strikes, a sign that the flow of oil might be safe for now. But as prices cool, things are heating up near the Persian Gulf. That's where the Strait of Hormuz, a key shipping route for oil and gas, is located. A lot are holding their breath. A lot of people are holding their breath to see if Iran possibly tries to close that critical waterway. NBC's Christine Romans has more on how the markets are responding.
So what happened in markets? The first chance to really react to that big news over the weekend, and you saw eventually a rally in the stock market and a big decline in energy prices, oil prices tumbling on the day. And you can really see exactly when that began. That began at the moment that news spread of the Iranian retaliation, targeted retaliation that many people who watched this were saying looks like it was largely symbolic. It could have been worse. Now, anything can happen in the days ahead. Of course, there's now late word from the president on social media that there is an Israel-Iran ceasefire. We're still waiting on confirmation on that from either or both of those two countries. But clearly that shows a de-escalation in the confrontation. And that is exactly what markets wanted to see. You saw the Dow, the NASDAQ, and the S&P all closing higher. You saw oil prices actually retreating from what has been an 8 or 10-day rally that took them to 5-month highs. And that's good news for American drivers. You had already been seeing gas prices creep higher over the past week, still lower than they were a year ago by a good measure, but they had been moving higher. The president, by the way, using his social media bully pulpit to tell everyone, don't run up energy prices, drill, baby, drill. He's very clear. Front and center in his mind, at least from his social media posts, is that he does not want oil prices to rise. And at least today, they are not. But still, a very difficult and dangerous situation with a lot of volatility in markets overall. Back to you.
And the market's getting used to some uncertainty there. Christine Romans, thank you so much. And as we learn more about the missiles that were fired from Iran earlier, we're also learning about the operation that sparked the retaliatory strikes. The Air Force just released this video a few hours ago showing those B-2 stealth bombers taking off at midnight to attack Iran. And NBC's Courtney Cubie has new details on what they're calling Operation Midnight Hammer.
Gotti, the U.S. military strikes over the weekend against Iran's nuclear facilities have highlighted a secretive stealth bomber that the U.S. Air Force flies, known as the B-2 Spirit bomber. Now, it flew just after midnight on Saturday morning out of Whiteman Air Force Base and headed straight for Iran. It was a 36-hour round-trip flight where the aircraft was refueled in the air multiple times, so it never had to land. The reason the B-2 was used here is because it's the only aircraft capable of carrying those massive ordnance penetrators known as a MOP. It's a 30,000-pound bomb. Technically, it's called a GBU-57. This is the first time it was ever employed in a combat situation. The U.S. military dropping 14 of them from these B-2 bombers. But Gotti, this entire mission started out with an act of deception. The B-2s were taking off from Whiteman. There are a lot of aircraft spotters and people on social media who see aircraft like that taking off. Well, as soon as they spotted them, they started putting it on social media. The military, aware of the fact it could out this mission, sent 7 additional B-2 bombers in the opposite direction of those first ones that headed off to Guam. Gotti, they were able to fly the entire way into Iranian airspace without being detected. They had a number of fighter jets, intelligence assets, and drones alongside them. The entire mission cloaked in secrecy, just like the B-2 bomber. Gotti?
Yeah. Courtney Cubie, thank you so much.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.